All right. Well, we're so pleased to have both of you with us today. And I love that your love of the outdoors and love of foraging and interest in all things wild and edible is what actually got you two together with each other. We have one of the things about this club is we actually have at least 3 marriages out of people that did not know each other until they joined the club. They met each other in the club, um, and they're definitely very singular individuals. So it's really interesting that they met their soulmate in the Inner Mushroom Club. This is not a promise to anybody. I just find it interesting, and so I find it interesting that you and Trent and Kristen have actually married their love of being outdoors with marrying each other, and then forming Modern Forager, which is their website, and also writing a cookbook, which Eleanor had mentioned earlier is one of the best mushroom cookbooks out there. And then what's great is they now live part of the time in Wisconsin, moving from Colorado to Wisconsin and then Oregon. And so Trent was telling us about hunting truffles in Oregon just like a week ago or something like that, a few weeks ago. And I also love that, when you were living in Colorado, you decided to put 2 things together, which we've adapted since, but put chanterelles and wild apricots together to make a jam. And that's the first time I'd seen anybody do that. And so when Sam and I were teaching our class, I was like looking for apricots. And then I went, duh, I live here where there's peaches. Let me try that, that's our adaptation that we love, is our chanterelle peach jam. So I really appreciate your creativity and innovation. And the other thing that's important about Trent is he's actually the current president of NAMA. And we love actually your energy and everything you've been doing with the North American Mycological Association, and just really appreciate the knowledge you're putting towards Modern Forager with all this information about using Google Maps and everything else, and then also the energy you're putting towards NAMA. So thank you, both of you. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about their company, Modern Forager, and also their cookbook. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Trent. Sam is trying to say something, and he's muted. So
make sure that you mute yourselves once his presentation starts. And if you have questions, write them in the chat, and Kristen's going to be monitoring the chat.
Hi, everybody. Kristen's right here next to me. It's kind of like that old game show. If you arrange your screen just right, we're both on there. She might be below me or beside me, but she's right over here, and Kristen's going to man the chat. And I'll do most of the presenting here. And gosh, we're excited. It's fun to come down and join your group tonight. We met Sam and Cornelia through NAMA, and obviously they're real leaders in this community nationally. And right back at you guys. I know Sam has put so much time and effort into NAMA over the last, I mean, 15 years. I don't know. You've been around longer than me. Only 7? No, 8. I thought it was like 15 based on all the stories I've heard about you. So it's such a wonderful community, and so fun to be part of, and to make friends here. And Kristen and I, when we started dating about that long ago, very early on, we went mushroom foraging together, and we just fell in love with it at the same time we were falling in love with each other. And it's really just become entwined in our relationship, and we both are a little obsessive maybe about it, and really just have embraced it and made it, kept it fun. As much as we do it, we're very careful to protect our love of mushrooms and not like commercialize things that will suck the joy out of it for us. We actually spend a fair bit of time talking about, like, hey, should we do this? Should we do that? We want to keep it fun and enjoyable. In our day jobs, we're web designers. We're actually down in Austin right now attending a web marketing conference and talking about SEO and Google AdWords and WordPress and building websites. Because that's how we make our living. But we chase the mushrooms around, and we've rearranged our life so that we can kind of find mushrooms every month of the year. We come out to Oregon in October, where it's like prime season, October, November, and that transitions even into the winter. There's pretty good mushrooming well into January. February is a little bit slow, but the morels will start out here in March, and then we'll head back to Wisconsin in April. And in way northern Wisconsin, we'll do a little maple syrup action, a little ramp. We like to chase ramps in the spring, and then the mushrooms will go crazy, and we're right back into it. There's a little downtime though, and during that time, we hunt burn morels. And burn morels started fascinating us probably the second year we were dating. We had kind of heard about these things out west, and we're sitting in Colorado in the winter, like, oh, we wish we could go mushroom hunting. And I did a bunch of research, and actually, I think maybe it might have been Langdon Cook that was one of the reasons we got turned on to it. You showed his book earlier, and he talks a little bit about it, did some research online, and it was hard back then. You know, this was like 10 years ago, and we found like burns, and we drove out west, and I did all this research. And we drove out to Oregon and went to this place and got out of our rental car at the time and walked into the woods, and oh my gosh, we started finding morels. Like, and we found like a giant bag of them, like a ton of morels, which was like, you know, it was exciting. And we went back to our hotel there, and we bought a dehydrator and did all the things that you're not supposed to do. We dehydrated them right in our hotel room and breathed the spores. And went out and got more and more, and we just went crazy over it. And then we did it again the next year. And by that time, what happened was I was doing all this research in the winter, looking at fires on Google Earth. And I would make these maps for where we would go. And we started like, hey, let's go to Idaho, let's go to Washington, let's go to California. And we started going to more states, and found that we really enjoyed really diversifying out and trying different states. And we go out for 2 or 3 weeks at a time and get a ton of mushrooms, a ton of morels. And I'm like totally allergic to morels now. I can't even eat them. They make me sick, but I still love getting them. And we discovered at the same time, if the burn morels aren't available, there's spring porcini out there at the same time, beautiful porcini in the woods and natural morels. And then it just became our thing. And then because I was making these digital maps, we were making friends, and everybody wanted my maps. And we started, I started kind of giving them away, and then we've put them up and started like letting people buy them. And it kind of just rolled. We were blogging about it. And before we know it, we had this like little business of me mapping all the burns out west and predicting where morels would be, and kind of educating people on all that. So that's kind of how it started back in the day. So I'm gonna pop on here and share my screen. I've got a presentation for you guys. Here we go. And I'm going to talk for, how long do I have, Sam? What it's my time is 6:30. It's 5:30 almost your time.
You've
7:30
got
your time.
you've got an hour and a half.
Oh wow. Okay.
We go till 9. So
okay. I love questions. You can drop them in the chat. We'll answer them along the way. If you need to raise your hand or jump on and ask them verbally, you're welcome to as well. I don't really mind the interruption. So feel free. Any questions you have, I'd love to entertain them for you while I go through this kind of presentation on burn morels. So here's the next picture. This is kind of us out hunting, Kristen and I. The picture on the left there is us in Colorado after a hunt. You'll see our 2 dogs there. We hunt with Lulu and Benzie. And they're crazy. They love the burns. They get really dirty like we do. And you can see we get black on our faces, and our hands turn black, and our clothes get black. And it's a very dirty business, burn morel hunting. And you kind of got to embrace the ash and the soot and get dirty. So that's one thing to kind of be aware of if you're going to go do this. And that's part of my angle here is I want to convince you to take a vacation and go burn morel hunting. It's a wonderful thing to do in May or June or even July or August sometimes. And it's not hard to do, to head out west and chase these guys. Now, I just want to talk about morels first in general. And I got a few ideas here I want to share. And I like to talk about morels not as like a mycologist, but as a forager. So I don't get too scientific, but we know they're polymorphic. They look a lot of different ways, different shapes, sizes, and colors. Even one species will grow right next to each other and be two radically different shapes and colors. And so they're very hard to identify down to the species. They're totally predictable, but they behave unpredictably. And what I mean by that is, with morels, you can't fight Mother Nature. They're going to come out very predictably when the soil temperature is right and the rain is right and the conditions are right. Once you learn them, they can be pretty easy to predict, yet at the same time, they totally surprise you. They'll show up in weird places. They'll show up where they're not supposed to be. And often we think they have a sense of irony, as in you go on a 5-mile hike looking for them and you don't find them, and you get back to your car and there's one right next to your car. Or that first year we went hunting, we flew out to Oregon, spent like 10 days doing this, came back home, and we found like the biggest, most beautiful morels right in our backyard, like the day we got home. And I've never seen that in Colorado. So they do have this strange sense of irony that we appreciate. That I don't think all mushrooms have that. They're very difficult to classify to the species, and it's fun to kind of guess what species you have. And ultimately, though, I think there's a lot of unknown yet in the species we're hunting. And if you don't have DNA testing at your fingertips, maybe you just need to embrace the unknown part of these mushrooms. Now, I consider them mycorrhizal, and I know not all mycologists do, but in my experience, their relationship is tightly interwoven with the trees, if not inextricably. Their behavior is 100% explained by trees. And burn morels are no different. You can't really understand their behavior without trying to understand the forest and the trees that they're with. Also, generally with morels, we think they shop local. And what I mean by that is, and you see this when you search online, like people give you tips on where to find morels, and they tell you go to, apple orchards. And I'm like, what? There's no apple. What kind of nonsense is that? Well, in a lot of the country, they're in apple orchards or ash trees or tulip trees, or, where you are, probably different trees. I heard somebody mentioned earlier that you found them with your, I want to say gecko tree. It wasn't that, it was a ginkgo tree. I don't even know what that is. But then you go out west and they grow with conifers, like firs and spruces and maybe pines, which if you were in parts of the Eastern Midwest, people would say you're crazy. You got to go look in the elm trees, or so they're very local. And I think people that think they're experts in morels, the quickest way to be humbled is go to a different part of the country and learn how, what you think is wrong. One of the wonderful things about being out west, whether it's natural morels or burn morels, are they move up in elevation. So you can hunt morels in Oregon from March all the way through Labor Day. And you can do really well. You can slay morels in July, like epic numbers. I'm going to show a picture later on of that, but you can start finding them in March at lower elevation. So they're a very long season if you follow the elevation. Whereas, as you guys probably know, in the Midwest, in the East, there's a 2-week window where they're maybe gonna pop in a specific locale, maybe a little longer. And then they're gone, and you're into your late spring or summer. But that's not the case out west. So they shop local, and you got to kind of apply local knowledge to them. Okay, so that was my morel talk generally. Now I want to move into burn morels. Now, bird morels, I'm going to say have three kind of general characteristics. Number one is they only grow in conifer forests, except when they don't. They only grow in the Western US and they only grow after a fire. So what I mean by they only grow in conifer forests are, there have been maybe one case where we've heard about them growing with a deciduous tree. However, if you want to find bird morels, you have to be in a coniferous forest. They do not grow with deciduous trees. And they will grow with a variety of conifers, from cedars to pines to firs to spruces. All those trees will host bird morels. They only grow in the Western US. I'm going to pop to the next screen here. With 4 exceptions in kind of scientific history anyways. They were found in Minnesota in 1977, in Eastern Ontario in 91, up in Michigan's UP in 2012 with the Duck Lake fire, and in Tennessee in 2016. Now, I think in these occasions, they were found with pine forests. And they, these were, I think all of them were DNA sequenced and were found to be the same species as the Western bird morels. No, we had a fire in northern Minnesota that they hunted last year, and I haven't seen the sequencing results from these. But my point here is morels love disturbances. We do know that, and in our maps, which I'll jump into later, I have burns across the entire United States. If you want to find burns in North Carolina or Georgia, I have those, and I think you can find morels in them. I don't think that if they're going to be technically burn morels, even though they grow in a burn, or maybe you find one where a fire has been, or around a campfire or a fire pit, you might find morels, or a slash burn, you might find morels, but those are like what we would call disturbance morels. They enjoy that disturbance, and they fruit there. They're not proper burn morels, which will come up in massive quantities and be some specific species. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about disturbance morels that are found in a burn. I'm talking about a species that only shows up after a burn. Now, these species are kind of mysterious. I think we've been learning more about them, and there's some studies going on. And this is a dangerous slide, right? I mean, if you're a mycologist, it'll like start naming morel species is a real problem. This will probably change, and I'm not entirely confident as I get down to number 5 and 6 in here that these are technically burn morels, or that there might not be a 7 or an 8. So let me talk about these, starting with number 1. The number 1, Morchella tomentosa, is absolutely a burn morel. You're going to only find it after a forest fire in the West in a burn. It is a special species. It is kind of the best of the bunch, in my opinion. Now, that's a picture of one right there. They tend to be really big. They're generally the largest of the bunch. They can be gray or black or white. They tomentosa must mean, a word in there means hairy or something like that. They have little hairs on the stem. When they're young, if you get a loop and look at the stem, you can actually see these little, kind of hairs in there. And as they get older, the hairs tend to go away, but you can also see them. Can you guys see my mouse when I do this? You can see along the edges here of the morel, like where the hairs were, if you look real close. And that's, I think, why it's called the tomentosa. They're also called the fuzzy foot because of the hair on the stem. What else do they call? Gray morels, burnt black morels sometimes. They have a couple of other, like all of them have these weird names people call them. Now, this morel in the scheme of things is the last one to fruit. So another thing about the burn morels are they fruit in succession. So if you go to any given fire at any given place, you can hunt one spot for 4 or 6 weeks, and there can be successions of fruitings as they move through the different species that are going to fruit. Now I have a couple pictures here. I want to show you, this is that same tomentosa, fuzzy foot. And I got a few examples here. They tend to be very chunky. They tend to, if you look in the foot, they've got like double walls down in the stem. They have a very thick stem, a very thick wall. They weigh a lot. If you pick a bag of these, your bag will be noticeably heavier than if you pick some of the other species that are going to grow in a burn. If I back up to here, to this picture, these are not the tomentosas. These are going to be one of the earlier species that pop up, and they're much lighter by volume when you pick them. The tomentosas are kind of cool too, because they're so thick and heavy, they cook up a little differently. They're really have, like, in your mouth, they have a lot of mouthfeel. They're a very meaty morel. So that's the one we kind of love to get the most, but it can be elusive. It comes at the last one that pops up. Frankly, we're probably typically picking these sextolata and exemias are what I think we get the most of that pop up first in the burn. And here's my theory. I mean, there's two things to talk about, like with burn morels, or like, why burns? Why do they pop up? Now there's all kinds of theories on why they pop up, when they pop up. I think what happens is that these species live with the trees, in the tree roots, in the soil. They're there all the time. And they're hanging out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. A fire happens and they fruit for the year after a fire, and also the second year and the third year to a lesser degree. But they can come off quite well in the second year. Typically they do best in the first year, but they're just there like all the time waiting for the fire. And curiously, if you log that same forest, if you come through and cut all the trees down, they don't really fruit. Other species will fruit in the same logged forest, like maybe a Morchella, I think the Snyderi, the one at the end here, is more likely to pop up in a cut forest, but the tomentosa you won't see after logging. So it's really exclusive to the burn. And I don't know, is it the change in the soil composition that triggers it? Maybe. I mean, it doesn't seem like the killing of the tree is quite enough to trigger it. Is it the burn that kills competing organisms that cause it to fruit? I'm not really sure. I'm gonna propose that because it's not really understood very well, that it's actually like a combination of factors, that it's not something as simple as one or the other, that maybe it's a little bit of soil change, or something to do with the temperature, something to do with the way the tree dies that really triggers this. It's obviously complex. And then maybe because the tree is dead or dying, that becomes the food that the mycelium, I guess, eats and turns into a fruit. Like, it goes into this mode of survival. It's going to fruit. It's going to eat those dead roots. It's going to fruit and spore and spread itself around because its host is dead. It's a mystery. And that's kind of the fun of it. Maybe sometime in the future, the scientists will figure out more, like what actually triggers these guys. So then you got the sextolatas and the exemias, the exuberance. The sextolata and the exemias are the ones that start out fruiting. They're very difficult to tell apart. I think between those two, like, you can't really tell by looking which one is which. You got to get them DNA tested. However, they do, I think, come up successively. There are people that think they can tell by looking the way the ridges are aligned or the pits are aligned, which one is which, or, whether they're growing in an open area or under a tree or near water. I don't know. Now the exuberance is a different looking one. That's going to be a bigger, blonder, rounder one. That seems to pop up a little more randomly, not with quite as much, and quite as much quantity. And then the Brunnea and the Snyderi, I don't really know how to tell those. Those are just ones that have been found from the DNA testing done with mushrooms in the forest. And some of the experts that I've interviewed and talked to have suggested those two also fruit in the forest fire. I don't think they're the prime ones that we're hunting all the time, though. I think those first three are mainly what we're catching when we're out hunting the burns. Now, they grow in, and we'll see in some pictures, in enormous quantities, like, you know, thousands per acre potentially. When they're out, you fill your bag, or, you know, if you have a 5-gallon bucket, I would say you can pretty easily fill a 5-gallon bucket in 60 to 90 minutes when they're out. Like in forest, you just get down and you pick as fast as you can, and the quantities are really quite astounding. Those are the species that we're looking at. I'm going to see, is there anything going on in the chat I need to answer in here? Okay. Okay. So there's some more examples of those tomentosas, and you can see on the left, this 1 second from the left is going to be the youngest of them, where the pits and the ridges are still really tight. As it gets a little bigger over on the left, it starts to open up a little bit. Often the black or dark gray foot loses that darkness and becomes a tan. And then if you look over to the third from the right, you can see the foot is even lighter in color, and it's getting even a little more open. So often as they age, they open up and change color, and they can be totally blonde, white almost, occasionally. Here's some kind of big mature ones, growing in a nice little cluster. Those same tomentosas, and now these are pretty big though. These are you know, probably as tall as a soda can, right here. These ones in front, and very beefy when you pick them. People often ask, do they taste different? Do they taste better? What's your favorite? That's like a weird topic. We pick a lot. We feed them to a lot of people. Some people rave about them. Some say they like others better. I don't know. I think it takes a pretty good palate to determine which morel is best. And I have a hunch that often that depends on some conditions, the age of the morel. Has it spored out? I think as they spore, their flavors may change with age. Probably depends on how you've treated it after you've harvested and how you've dried it. I think there's a lot of factors. So I tend to kind of dodge the question of how do these taste. I think they're as good, but I don't really eat enough of them myself to know. And I kind of defer to you. The one thing I would say is don't tell me your local one is best, because that's just what everybody says. Like they think their local morel tastes the best, which, you know, that's cool, I guess. Or if Eleanor, she's on this, if she says one tastes best, I'll defer to her too. She's got a lot more experience at eating morels than I do. Okay, so here's another burn morel. Now I'll point out, as we look through some of these pictures, I don't know, as you look at this, like, what do you see? One thing I'm always looking at and paying attention to is the kind of needles and duff that are around it. You know, is there pine, fir, spruce? Like, what do we have going on in here? And you'll notice, you know, what kind of forest you're in that way. You know, these look to me like they're firs right here. And I don't know though, somebody feel free to correct me from these dead ones. If you can tell, they're not pines. But look too, there's a lot of duff. This mushroom is growing and really pretty. There's like a brown, we call it duff, below the mushroom. It's not ashy. It's not barren. So pay attention to the grounds as I go through and show some of these pictures. Now we're going to kind of come back out to a high level view here and talk about where they grow, these burn morels. And what I've done here is taken a kind of the Northwest. This is Oregon and Washington, and the national forests are here, and there are different color codes. And usually this is where we're hunting in these colorized areas. Because that's where the forests are, the burn, they're going to be in these big national forests. And all of these areas are pretty good. And what you've got here in Oregon and Washington, if you're not familiar, is running right down the kind of left western third, I should say, is the Cascade Range of mountains. And the east and west side of that mountain range are going to be a little different. I'll talk about in a sec. But they grow in the Cascades here. On the western side of the Cascades are the coastal range. And you can find berm morels here in the coastal range. However, they're not near as abundant. I would say it's a reach to think you can go in the coastal range and find berm morels. Certainly, if you live there and there's some burns, you can go find them. But the abundance of them is not as great. So I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, the coastal range is going to be a 2 or a 3 in terms of what you're going to find and how easy they are going to be to find. But I'm not going to say they're not there. The further east you go, the more you're going to find. So if you imagine this Cascade Range here, it has an eastern and western side. Usually the eastern side of the Cascade Range is better than the western side of the Cascade Range. And the western side, though, can be quite good. And then over here, running to the east out of the Cascade Range, we call these the Blue Mountains in Oregon. And up north, I don't know what these are called. They run to the east. As you head this way to the east, the mushrooms are excellent, if maybe arguably better. And then as you go into, and I don't have it here, but as you go into Idaho and Montana, just excellent berm morel hunting, all the way into eastern Wyoming, where there's some mountains, down into Colorado, and the mountains there, all the way down into New Mexico and Arizona can have wonderful berm morels, and it's high elevation mountains, especially when the spring rains can come. Northern California is pretty good as well. And they've been known to be found as far east as the Black Hills in South Dakota, which is a bit of a stretch. There's actually a burn there this year that I'd love to check out because I've never hunted there, and it'd be fun to find them like in the pine trees of the Black Hills. But, as you get down into Arizona, you're more in a Doug fir pine forest, some ponderosas and Doug firs. And then as you come down back into California, they grow there all the way from probably Yosemite north in the mountain range there. The one area that's kind of weird is down here in this western part of southern Oregon and northern California. Even though it looks good down here, it's not really good morel hunting in this part of the country. And I think there's something weird about the ground composition, about I don't know what it is. The soil is different there, and there's not a lot of morels in that particular, this Rogue River National Forest, and then right down in California. So this is the same kind of map, but this is a tree map. And hopefully you can see this. Okay. And what I did, I got it's not really a tree type. It's more of like a forest type, in the sense these are the predominant trees in the forest here. And as you look at these, I'm going to show this green here, this western juniper, is going to be pretty deserty and no good. But this blue here is going to be your grand fir. And the grand fir is a really cool tree. The morels love it. And by the way, so do the spring porcinis. They love the grand fir. And this is probably my favorite. If I could just pick a place and know, I want to be, I love to be in these grand fir forests in here. I know they do well in here. And then you've got the red, which is the mountain hemlock, which is going to be also very good. And then you've got the dark green here, the western hemlock, which is going to be a little less good. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they can still be in the western hemlock, but not to the same degree, because by then you've kind of come back down lower in elevation. And we've got this little pink in here, the silver fir, they're good there. So really, as you head up the mountain range here and get into the Cascades, it's the tree types change. And maybe that's why there's more berm morels there. But I also think as you get into the coastal range, one of the things there is that they don't really freeze. When you look at the coastal range in the winter, it doesn't hold a lot of snow. And I think the burn morels, one thing that I see everywhere that we find them is if they're in abundance, they're in a place where there's been good snow held all winter, and that snow melts, and there's something about, I think, the cold weather that they really thrive on. In fact, they were found a few years back in Arizona in the fall after they had a really cold spell. That the burns happened during the summer, and it got unseasonably cold in September and snowed for quite a while, and then it got really warm again and it rained, and they actually fruited the same year as the burn, which is kind of unheard of, because normally the burns happen in the summer, the ground's covered all winter, and it's the next spring when you hunt them. So I think there's something to do with that holding snow that they also really like in these areas. So that's the tree map. Now, seasonally, I think I have I got elevation coming up here in a minute, so I'll hold off on that. So that was big picture, like where we're hunting from. You can also, by the way, BC, Alberta in Canada, the Yukon in Canada, and Alaska are all high end, full of burn morels. So if you want to go, north of CONUS, continental United States, they're gonna be up there too. The problem with a lot of once you get out of especially Oregon and Washington is often that the summers are really dry. So when you get to your Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, is that they often have this weather pattern where the snow melts, and you're going to need some rain after the snow melts at the elevation that you're at and before the burn morels pop. And if they don't get that rain, the burn morels don't pop as much. So it can be a little riskier to hunt in some of these areas, unless the rains come. And for instance, last year in Colorado and Idaho and Montana, it rained really well into the late spring and early summer, and they had just tremendous flushes of morels. But some years it'll be dry, and your forest fires won't produce any morels because there was kind of a dry gap there. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go check the chat. Kristen just told me there was a good chat in here. Oh, the extra rain right now. You know what? I think that's good for now, but it's not the rain that we're looking for right now. It's all the snow that it's going to be dropping in the mountains in California and Oregon. And for that matter, Colorado has a lot of snow right now. It's really everywhere. There's a ton of snow right now. So I'm going to say that the rain is great, but it's because it's delivering snow. And what I'm really looking for, like, I might as well talk about this now. It's a good time. What I think happens is burn morels tend to come up a little later than the naturals out west. So if you're in, Colorado, Oregon, these natural morels will fruit at a slightly lower elevation, and they'll fruit like 2 or 3 weeks before the burn morels, and I think they can fruit off of snow melt. But I think there's like this gap between when the snow melts, and there's like 3-4 weeks before the burn morels will pop, and they need rain in that period to really pop in abundance. Now you can still find them in what they call microclimates, and a lot of hunters will be like, oh no, they do fine in snowmelt, I find them. But I think you kind of have to be an expert. You have to know how to find these special micro habitats that are going to hold moisture because they're north facing and there's a spring or a seep, and you got to find just the right conditions versus just walking into the forest where they're everywhere. And that's what I'm talking about. So yeah, to answer your question, I think the rain's awesome. The snow is awesome. But I'm really going to be looking for some rain come May, 1st of May, middle of May, end of May to really trigger good freedom. Okay. So this is a beautiful picture of tomentosas right here. We often do the pictures of these tomentosa, the Morchella tomentosa, in our slides because they're just so picturesque and big. What you probably can't tell from this, or maybe you can, these are big mushrooms. I mean, these are as big as your fist or bigger. And these are going to be a lot of spruce needles. I believe this is mostly a alpine fir and Engelmann spruce forest in Colorado. And this picture would have been taken probably the second week of August, like maybe August 10th or 12th. And they were like abundant that late into the year. And you can even see in the background, if you look, they just keep going. Like this was, you go out, you pick for an hour, you fill your bucket and you head home. Like how many morels do you really need? Well, that's a rhetorical question. I'll let you answer that for yourself. But they were just everywhere that year in this burn, because of the rain that happened in Colorado that year, the good summer rains. Now there's the trick is you got to find burn maps. You gotta go online, and you can, I got list here, InsaWeb, Gaia GPS has them, Onyx Maps, CalTopo, Modern Forager, that's us. Usually the problem is not finding burns though. The real problem is there are too many burns. The problem is there's 10 million acres that burn in the Western US. And you want to go find, look, you want to find that 10 acres that's good. You want to find that one spot that you feel like you're going to get to. And that's what we do at Modern Forager, is I go through like all the burns, and it's on the post. I don't remember. Do you remember how many where there were? Where they're like, we'll look up the numbers. The numbers are amazing, how many acres burn, and then what we reduce that down to hunt on our maps. But there are free maps. You don't have to spend 25 or 40 bucks with us to get burn maps. So there's some spots you can get them. Now, I want to kind of switch gears again, and we were looking at big picture, like maps of forests, and now start getting into we call it armchair planning, and we go from armchair planning and kind of get more on the ground. Soil temp is probably the only kind of empirical tool you have to really guess when they're going to be out. And it's not perfect. And if you look at these two pictures here, and I tried to make it so you could see them, I got the same soil temp monitor here. I stuck it in the ground, and there's some on the left. The ones on the left, oddly enough, are really early in the season. This was the first, like this year we hunted. I took that picture with the soil at 57 degrees, was the first ones we found. Now I think it's like on a southern exposure, and they were getting sun. The ones on the right, same burn, different location, but like 3 or 4 weeks later. And look at the temperature difference. It's 48 degrees right there. And it's 57.8 in the other one. We're usually looking for them to start popping once the temperature gets 50, 51, 52. Seems to be the ticket. I've noticed though with these thermometers that there's a lot of variance. So here's a couple tips if you're a thermometer person. One is you kind of got to test the same time in the day. The temperature goes up all day. You got to test in a similar slope and a similar environment. The other thing is I did it, and I like this about the picture. I did it wrong. I don't know if you can see the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. What I did wrong on the right is I should have put it an inch deeper in the soil. That's the other, as you put it deeper and shallower, the temperature changes quite a bit. So you got to make sure you jam it down the same distance every time if you're going to measure the soil temp. So I do measure it. I used to measure it a lot more. I've kind of given up on measuring soil temp because I don't feel like it ultimately gets me where I want to be. And I feel like it's more like trying to find the right environment by what's growing and how big the grass and the other things that grow, how far along they are is almost more reliable. Are a lot of people hunting them, or is it pretty quiet? You know, it can go either way. We've gotten into these burns where there are other people hunting them. They're always quiet in the sense other people may be hunting, but they're not like making a ruckus. They tend to be quiet. It's not like a social scene or anything. But you know, it's not as much fun to hunt where somebody's been in the last couple of days either. You want to try to have it all to yourself. But like anywhere, if you're willing to walk a distance, you can have it to yourself. If you're willing to drive deeper into the forest, you're able to have it to yourself. And if you really want to have it to yourself, you go to a second year burn. Nobody ever hunts those, and you can definitely find morels in them. Although we tend to hunt the first year burns because they're more reliable. So yeah, there can be people around and some other cars parked, but they're you still feel like you have it to yourself because everybody's pretty quiet out there searching for the morels. Now, this is in my hand are some very young tomentosas. These are what they look like often when they first come out. They're almost like jet black, and they're still really tight, and they're small. And these will open up and get big, but these are kind of babies, but they're really beautiful mushrooms. Oh, and you put the numbers in there for 2023. We did 2.6 million acres of burns in 11 Western states. 1,300 fires, and we curated it down to 233 fires with potential and 260,000 acres. And we narrowed that down. We rated 59 fires as A fires, totaling 155,000 acres in Western states with an average of 26,000 acres per fire. So it looks like that's what we got this year. So when we talk about how they go up and down in elevation, depending on the state you're in, let's start with like Oregon as a classic example. Really, really early ones are going to come out probably March. They will come out in early March to the end of March at below 1,000 feet, and they're not as abundant though, but you will find some in a low elevation burn on the the western side of the Cascades, maybe like around Eugene, for example. However, as they go up in elevation, they're going to get better, and the prime season starts more like 4,000 feet around Memorial Day weekend. So probably like middle of May to middle of June is the prime season, and it's going to run 3,500 to say 5,000 feet in elevation. And that's when most people are going to be out hunting them in Oregon. Now you go to California, I think the elevations are a little lower. You go to Washington, maybe the elevations are a little higher. When you go to Idaho and Montana, the elevations go higher and the season tends to push out a little later. So for instance, I would say in Idaho, you're probably going to be at 5,000 feet in the middle of June is going to be the prime. And we hunted in Montana last year. We hunted in July. What was the elevation, Kristen? It was the 8th? I don't really remember, but it was pretty high elevation for Montana. And they were really peaking in July was the good month there. And by that time, they really had moved out of Oregon in large numbers. So as you go further east and go to higher elevations, they tend to happen a little later in the year. In Colorado, they would start in probably the second week of June at around 8,500 feet. And they will continue into August at 10,000 feet or higher. So depending on what state you're in, there's different elevation ranges. So part of the secret is finding the right elevation because the temperatures are so vastly different as you go up and down in elevation. So if you go into Oregon, first week of June, and you go up to 6,000 feet, it's going to feel really wintry there. You're going to walk into the forest at 5,500 to 6,000. There's going to be some snow patches. That's a bad sign for burn morels. The ground's going to be still pretty wet and soft from the snow melt. It's going to have that weird, like it's been under snow and the ground is really weird. Whereas you come down to 4,000 feet, things are starting to grow. Where you park your car, there's going to be some grass that's going to be ankle high to shin high. You know, about that, grass will be about that tall. the forest, the trees are starting to green up in the forest. That's what you're looking for. And then we pay a lot of attention to aspect. As you go from north to south, it's like changing elevation by several hundred feet. So 3,500 at south will be like 4,000 on a northern facing aspect.
Like 62 or something.
And in Montana, we were at 6,200 the second week of July last year, just doing really well. My favorite aspect to hunt is the east-west. Probably the east is my all-time favorite. I like hunting east-west because in the mountains, when you're on an east or west, there's lots of gullies. So you get a main east, but you'll get lots of little norths, lots of little souths. So you got some warm spots, some cooler spots. The real problem with the south is not the temperature typically, it's the precipitation or wetness. Southern exposures in the west tend to be a lot drier. And in some states like Colorado, if you go into a valley that runs east-west and you look at the north and the south facing slopes, they will have completely different types of trees on them, because over time, the trees that thrive in the, need the north facing, more moist holding slopes, they don't thrive on the south facing slopes. So I think the north-south is probably more about precipitation or holding moisture than it is about temperature. But generally speaking, I try to avoid southern exposures. I'm always looking for northern exposures, eastern exposures. That's where I want to start my hunting. If it's a really good year and it's been wet, they will be in the south facing exposures, though. That's just not normal in the West. Let's see. Oh, good. Kristen, you put a thermometer out for everybody on Amazon. Was that the folding one or the other one? Yeah, I like the folding one because you don't like impale yourself with it accidentally. The other one, you lose the black tip on it that goes in the ground. You lose that little protective tip. You're walking around with a sharp metal rod that's, good way to hurt yourself in your glee of mushroom hunting. So the other thing is we're typically trying to find the first flush. And if you find it, what will happen is you'll drive into the forest, you'll get out of your car, and you'll start finding mushrooms. And as you go up and up and up, the mushrooms will get smaller and smaller. And you won't find any old mushrooms. So you're at the first flush because there's no old mushrooms. And as they get smaller, you're a little bit too high in elevation. So you can either go to a more southern exposure, someplace a little warmer, someplace a little sunnier, or you can drop down in elevation and find bigger mushrooms. So often we're really trying to find the right elevation. And once we find that, once you kind of know what they're at, then you can just start going to that type of terrain everywhere. And usually there's a range of, 300 feet, 400, 500 feet that we're finding them in. But in some years it can be pretty tight. The range can be even smaller, 100 or 200 feet. But generally it's a pretty good range. And then in a good year, then the second flush comes along. So you might drop a little lower and find really nice fresh mushrooms along with some older ones around them. And that second flush is awesome. So you can kind of gauge where you're at. And when we start hunting in these forest fires, often the first day or two, one of our strategies are we want to find places where we can hit lots of different elevations and exposures. We want to get out of our car and hit a lot of different places, or pick a trail that takes us across a variety of exposure aspects and elevations to try to figure out where they're at. And then finally, it's that late gray flush is the one that we love, those tomentosas. It's almost sometimes worth trying to go a little later in the season so you can catch those grays, those tomentosas. They do tend to grow I think they tend to be more abundant, those gray ones, in Montana and Idaho. As you go further east, you find more of those than you do in that Cascade range. So if you really want those, you might want to look more in the Blue Mountains or in Idaho, eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana type areas. Yeah, I'm going to talk about permitting and burn closures in a little bit. So we'll get to that. So that's elevation. So this is still kind of, planning. Let me see what I got here. So this is a fun picture. This was taken in July, and these are second flushers. So when we went out picking these, we were finding a very few small tomentosas. But what we were finding were these big, I don't know if they're sextulatas or exemias, but they're big, robust mushrooms. You can see, I mean, that's a pretty good day that we went out and we got this pile of mushrooms. Now, you might ask, why are there two piles there? I'm going to guess one is Kristen's and one is mine. She might have picked more than us. So we had a friend. One is our friends and one is ours. 3 people. Oh, that's right. There were 3 of us hunting. That's one day, like one trip up into the woods, a couple hours. That's kind of the take that you get. And that's like a picnic table. That's a big pile of mushrooms to be cleaned off and dealt with. We'll talk about that in a little bit, some of the logistics of doing this. You do have to kind of plan ahead on how you're going to manage this haul if and when you get it. And again, this is in Colorado. This particular haul. Okay, so now I want to look at some map study with you. This is a burn we went to in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, and it looked good. This was earlier on, a few years back when we were still learning. And we drove along the road here. This is a pretty good highway down here in the southern part. And we drove down and drove up this road, and we went up this road. We went all the way up in here. We explored this burn for a couple hours, thinking it would be good. And it wasn't really very good. We found probably in like 2 hours of driving around here, we probably found like 1.5 gallons each of morels. We felt like we worked pretty hard. And what we learned from this was, as we went through the fire, it felt like a controlled burn. This fire did not cause mayhem and tree death and destruction. It kind of ran low across the ground and would, kill little pockets of trees, but it was not a very destructive fire. And I think what happened here is, if you look at this picture, you can kind of see it. This is a satellite picture from before the burn. You can see all the ground in the picture. This area, I think, has maybe been selectively logged, has had some controlled burns. And when you can see the ground this easily through the trees, there's going to be burn morels there, but they're not going to be in such great quantities as they would be otherwise. And if I were going back to this fire, I would look at this and I would try to pick the areas, and you can see them in here where the trees are the thickest. That's the place you want to go to. And that's where we were even heading. I think we made it all the way up into these trees before we decided to head out and go to the next burn. And we went to the next burn and we just slayed them, where you could tell by looking at the satellite picture how much better it was. Now, this is another burn, and looking at this is like very, very nice looking. You cannot see the topography on this. But this area, I think right here is the top of the burn, and right here is what ended up being 10,000 feet, very high elevation. And this slope here runs all the way down to this northern edge. It runs down to about 8,000 feet. And we hunted this slope, this north-facing slope, because again, it's hard to tell the topography here, but this would go from about 8,000 to about 9,500 up this slope. And it was north-facing. It had heavy trees. Yep, that's in Colorado. And we hunted this slope for probably 6-8 weeks, really not going up much higher in elevation. And there was like the first flush, the second flush, the third. There were 4 flushes this time, with the tomentosas being the last flush. And we ended up having to leave. We were like going on a vacation, and they were everywhere. It was like painful to leave on vacation when this fire was near our house and we were finding so many. But then when we came back from vacation, we went up to the top, and they were going off at the top of this burn like crazy. So this burn we hunted for 3 months, and got as many as we could carry every time we went out. It was crazy, and it was it was weird. Like you asked, are there people in these burns? We talked about this locally. I did all these classes all around town on it. You know, we talked and talked and we thought, oh, there's gonna be so many people in here. And it felt like we had this entire thing to ourselves for 90 days. It was weird. We had a friend that would hunt it with us. There were two guys, and we both had those two had, and we had Gaia GPS running, and we would do our trails, and we would compare them with each other almost every day. And we ended up like being strategic. And if you looked at our trails, we covered, between the four of us, it felt like every inch of this forest on this slope. And it was kind of fun because we would compare our trails, like, okay, we're going to go over here tomorrow, and you guys are going to go over here, and then we'd compare again, and we'd find the spots that neither of us had been to, and keep hunting them. And there was like no one else there. There was hardly any sign of other pickers for you know, the whole 90 days, which was pretty neat. So they're not always crowded. This is, if you zoom in closer on Google Satellite, kind of what you're looking for if you can find trees like this in the satellite of the burn area, you're in a really good spot. This is about as good as it gets. These are big, mature conifers. Now these happen to be spruce and fir forest, and was really abundant with mushrooms. So I want to see that versus that, to kind of highlight the difference. If I could kind of choose where I want to go. I want to kind of summarize a few things here, what we're looking for. Number one is we're looking for national forests. What we want to avoid are wilderness areas and national parks, and also tribal reservation lands as well. If you're not careful when you're doing your map study, you'll find really wonderful areas. And if you don't pay attention, you'll be like, oh, that's in Glacier National Park, or that's in Yosemite National Park, or Crater Lake National Park. And you cannot hunt in a national park. Hopefully you know that. However, in pretty much every national forest in the West, you can hunt. I'm going to talk about permits in a little bit, with the exception of wilderness areas. You can go into wilderness areas, but you're not supposed to take out foraged goods. So you want to avoid those. Now, the other thing we look for when we're studying our maps is we're looking for accessibility. Like we're not in the best shape. And for us, it's very important that we can drive into a fire, get out of our car, and navigate on foot to where we want to go. And probably the biggest challenge with finding the right fire is access. And that means you can drive into it, number one. And number two means it's not too steep. So you can walk around in it. You don't want places that have heavy slopes. And we're going to look at that in a minute on a map. And you want to also be able to, if you can, have like walking trails. If there's any of those, they're great to get yourself deeper in the forest, but you want to have good car access. You don't want to have to hike a few miles up a mountain before you pick. It's just exhausting to do unless you're in really good shape. And frankly, it's hard to carry out pounds and pounds of mushrooms as well. You're going to want to pay attention to find the right elevation range for the time of season you're in. You're going to want to look for heavy tree structure. That's map study ahead of time. You might pay attention to the tree species if that's important to you. Although in a lot of these forests, once you find just a tree laden forest in the West, you probably don't need to worry too much about the tree species. You want to pay attention to the aspect. I am looking to go to places that are not full southern exposures, because I do feel like if it's a little bit dry, they're not going to pick as well. And again, the steepness is really difficult to hunt. I will tell you, burn morels love steep hillsides. They're just difficult to hunt, and if it's rainy or wet, they can be quite dangerous. The mud and the ash when it's wet is very slippery, and I tend to avoid steep hills generally, but especially when it's wet. I don't want to slip and slide down a hill and get hurt. So that's just a quick checklist of territories that you can find, and we haven't even gone to the burn yet. This is like armchair research we're doing right here before we go. And what we do is we will pick 2 or 3 burns out. We'll find several roads into them. We'll mark several spots. We'll have backup plans, and our backup plans will have backup plans because you never know what's going to be open and available. And we typically try to plan a full day of potentially scouting. And the reason is, if you think, like, especially like, hey, take a vacation, you're going to fly into Portland and you're going to rent a car, and you're going to fly into Boise and rent a car, and you're going to drive up into the burn. You don't want to count on driving up into the burn, driving down the road, getting there, getting out and hunting. You kind of got to prepare for the road may be closed. Or maybe when you get there, it's not right. So we tend to plan on a day to explore, and then a couple days to hunt. Okay. Safety is important. I think when you're in the forest, there's like a lot of mushroom hunting. I probably don't want to get into general safety rules, but I will warn you, there are deep hidden holes. Because what happens are these big trees burn, and they burn down into the roots. And the fire, like if you go out into the burns in Oregon right now, it's, end of February, early March, some of these trees, I mean, I know because we just had a friend that was just out there in February going to one of the marquee burns. And he's like, these trees are still burning. You go into the fire and they're still smoking. You can smell them and see the smoke because the fire gets down into the roots and into the trunk and goes underground and follows the roots of some of these trees. And what that creates is a big empty hole. So you want to pay attention. I think the most common injury is going to be stepping into a hole and like twisting your ankle or extending your knee. However, the real danger is going to be the mud. It's going to be flash floods. It's going to be washed out roads. So you want to stay out. We don't ever hunt when it's really raining hard because we're nervous about it. And the wind, we usually get out of the forest if it's windy because there's a lot of dead trees, and we don't want them to fall on us. Look at this picture here. It's a little different type of forest, right? You see what's going on here in this forest? Those are pine needles. So I think this is a ponderosa pine. I'd have to look to be sure. But these are popping up in a pine forest. So a little different type of terrain here than we've seen in some of the others. And this is what I talked about. You want to have several scout options pre-planned. You want to have your maps saved offline, whether that's printing maps out or getting a good topo map and marking it. Your cell phone is probably not going to work out there, so you don't want to rely on digital maps that have to be brought in through a cell phone signal. You got to have them downloaded to your phone. You're going to want to be ready to test a variety of elevations and aspects to kind of figure out where they are. Look for the right territory. The one kind of painful advice I'd give is, you can't fight Mother Nature. We pay a lot of attention to the precipitation. We have added precipitation maps this year to our burn maps. And what our precipitation maps do is they score, we score the whole country by on a scale of 1 to 6. And the way you get a 6 is you have 6 weeks in a row with 1 inch of rain. And so, like for instance, right now, there's places in Idaho that have a 4. In the last 6 weeks, they've had 4 weeks with 1 inch of rain in snow right now. But we often use that to plan where we're going to go. We're looking for places that have had good, steady rains for a long period of time. And then as we get closer to picking a spot, we'll pay attention to the last week or two. But the best spots that had rain 3 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago as well, and 5 and 6 even. So we do pay attention to the last 6 weeks when we're trying to pick where to go. And we tend to be pretty flexible. I try not to make plans. I feel like when we say we're going to go to Boise and go north and hunt morels and the second week of June this year, what that means is it's going to be dry. Maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe it'll be moist there. But if we kind of play it a little bit more by ear and try to keep our plans a little more loose, we can go, oh, right now, Montana is really better. We want to go to Montana in the next week or two because they've had more rain, or maybe we want to go to Washington. So I do try to avoid deciding now where I'm going to go at the end of May or June or July next year. Okay, so now this is a picture of a burn. I think before we do that, I want to come back and look at some maps before we go look at some pictures of burns, like we're there. We're not there yet. We're still doing armchair research. These are our maps. Like I said, I got precipitation maps. I've got tree species maps in here. I've got eastern burns. I also have they're called stewardship maps. They're places that have been forested or thinned or clear cut, because those have not burn morels, but those will have disturbance morels, and a lot of morel hunters like to go to those too. So I have those maps for the whole country. If you want to find, forested areas in Georgia, I got that for you. I also have burns in Georgia for you as well, if you want to go explore disturbance morels in the east, or maybe even find some of the rare burn morels that occasionally happen in the east, especially in pine forests. I've got those in here too, but the marquee products are over here, the big states. I want to go this year with you guys. I want to go to Idaho, because I think Idaho is the best state this year to go to. I mean, every year it's different. And these are all the burns in Idaho that after I did my study, I removed 3/4 of them. These are the ones that I like the best. And I want to go up and I want to pick my top burns. These are the ones I really like the best. And I'm going to zoom in here. This is one of my favorites right here. And I'll hover over this, and what have we got? This is called the Moose Fire. I gave it an A+. That ranges from 3250 to 8650. So 3250 is pretty low. But you'll be able to pick this fire from Memorial Day probably all the way into end of July, pretty reliably based on that elevation range. And it's huge. It's 220 square miles. It has a lot of access. And there's a huge portion of fire that's 5.5 K and above. That's the entire middle part of the fire. That's going to be pretty good too. There's a lot of roads coming in. There's over 100+ square miles of perfect terrain above 6,000 feet. So if you're looking for a place to go in like the end of June, this fire's got a lot of promise for June, second half of June, first half of July, in my opinion. And this is here's the satellite map. You can see we're looking at this treed area right here is going to be the sweet spot, not this rocky sandy area on the fringes of the fire. I've got a Forest Service map. We'll zoom in on that in a second. But the other thing I add on these maps, I'm kind of into this. I've done this thing called morel hotspots, and what I do is I measure the tree cover and I rate it like on a scale of 1 to 4. I measure the slope and I rate it on a scale of like 1 to 3, as in if it's too steep, I give it a bad score. If there's not enough trees, let me rephrase that. If there's a lot of trees, I give it a high score. If it's not very steep, I give it a high score. If it's under 15% slope, that's a perfect score for steepness. If it's between 15 and 30, it's an okay score. If it's above 30, I give it a 0. It's too steep. And then I also give it extra points if it's north facing, and I subtract a little bit if it's south facing. And then I score it out, and yellow is the best, but light green and green are perfectly great. I mean, they're very good, but yellow is the best. And here's what that looks like, just to kind of help find the right areas you might want to focus on. That's my morel probability map. I see some really cool areas down here. I see some nice all through the middle of the fire, but you can also see the gray, the low areas I would avoid. The kind of weird green, the flat green over here is going to be really poor quality. I think it got a 0. And then the other thing I add in here, I'm going to zoom out, are these burn severity maps. And the way I do that is we do pictures. They're infrared pictures of the forest before and after the burn. And they're hard to do because it's hard to find a picture where there aren't clouds. So I don't have them for all fires. And these gray areas, I think, are where I didn't have data, so I couldn't map it either before or after. There wasn't good enough pictures, but the infrared picture bounces off of the green leaves. And so this is called a burn severity, a DNBR. It's a thing. But I only do it for these portions of the fires. And the bigger the difference, I score it. So this purple means it was a very heavy burn and it went from very green to very black. And usually we try to avoid, I don't want to say avoid, but we're kind of aware of where we're going. We like to find the lesser burns. I like to find the yellows, the greens, the oranges, and I'll visit into the reds and the purples and see, occasionally these highly burned areas can be very productive in a good year, but we find the most in the lighter burn areas, where they haven't been, like, we call it moonscape, where everything's been killed and and the ground is ash and the ground is gray. There's no leaves on the ground. There's no green in the trees. Tends to be, I don't know, 9 times out of 10, the least productive area. So these are maps to help. But really where you're going to spend a lot of your time is on this U.S. Forest Service map. And we're going to zoom in on that because you can use that to discover the roads that come in here. And then you can pop over to the satellite. So you can see like a road like this. You can see it's not too steep. These roads here, like that area right there looks really nice. It's not very steep. It's 7,700 feet. So it's pretty high. This is going to be like a later in the year spot right here. You can go look at satellite and see the trees are really good. Whoops. So you're going to want to study your map and kind of find the right areas, and you can mark them and get in and out of these areas to hunt them. So these are the maps that I prepare to help burn hunters find just the right areas. And I have other maps off of this. I do have the tree species maps, and I have the forest road maps to help if you really want to zoom in on a specific tree species. Oddly enough, people really also seem to like cedars. Cedars are a really popular tree to focus on, which seems counterintuitive because cedars are known to not host mycorrhizal mushrooms. So I don't know why that is, but a lot of people want the cedar. Maybe the western cedar is a little different than the eastern cedar.
Look at the chat.
How do you determine the tree species? I have over here, I have a special map. I'll click, I'm going to just stop that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to control click it. It takes a minute to load the tree species map. I've got a new one coming out next week that is I think going to be easier to use. But we're going to let this load for a minute. And hopefully it's going to work for me. This map will eventually, and I might not have time now. I don't know why it's not loading over here where my legend is. Let me try it again. And it will let you pick your different tree species, and it will show the tree species on the map. So that here they come in here. The tree species are starting to load, and you can pick the tree species that you want to target. The problem I've had with the tree species map is that it's too granular. Like often people want to have a forest type. So that's the map I'm adding next, is more of a general forest type, because you really only want to have 5 or 6 forest types to see across the country or across the West, not like every darn species of pine, spruce, fir, cedar, larch, that kind of thing going on. Is that tree species software available to all? Yes, it is. It is available to all. Do commercial hunters use your maps? Yes, they do. I don't think they talk about it, but we do have commercial hunters that buy our maps for sure. Okay, I think I answered those questions. Were there any more questions in there? And Cornelia, I think that's you asking, these maps, just so you know, that I put together and sell are almost all, if you know how to find this stuff, you can kind of figure it out on your own. I use all publicly available data from the Department of Agriculture and from the Forest Service. The only exceptions are the DNBR maps. I made those. I don't think you're going to find those. You're not. And the morel probability maps, I made those as well. However, I used publicly available information to build the map. So there's nothing in here like I don't have any more information than the public has. I just try to combine it in a way that is kind of more useful than most people. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to parse the data. I think that's really the problem is not that there's not data, it's just there's too darn much of it. Like roll up your sleeves, set aside the weekend, and you can go figure this out. But yeah, Kristen's like, weekend, you spend months. I do. I spend a lot of time on this, putting this together. It's not easy. Okay. Let me get back to there's the more tree species loading, but I don't want to spend more time on that. Let's see. So that I was studying the burns here, showing you how we find the roads. We study the roads, we study the elevations. I also have in here directions if you want to do elevation screening, which is kind of fun. You can lay an overlay, you can pick an elevation range, and you can lay an overlay on the map that shows elevation ranges. I often do that because I want to, there's an example here. I want to find a zone. So this is an elevation screen where I run blue to purple to pink. And I might be looking for the purple zone is going to be the sweet spot. So I often run elevation screens so that I can more easily find like that range that I want. Because sometimes when you're in here looking around, it's hard to find like, I want 6,000 feet. Where is that on the map? So I have all the directions in here for you to also add elevation screens to the map. And that's, where is that? That's in here under my CalTopo video instructions for adding slope angle shading. If you want to find certain types of slopes, elevation shading, public-private land boundaries, which is really handy, and tree canopy filters. So I'm into my mapping. Okay, back to this. Let me jump forward to where we were. Now, let's pretend like we've done all our research. We've picked out some spots and we're driving into the forest. And we're trying to find just the right area. As you're driving through the forest, you're going to see a lot of this. This would be considered on the burn severity map a severe burn. And what you're seeing here is there's no needles or leaves. Needles in the tree, except in the background there, you'll see some needles in the tree. And there's no needles on the ground either. They're ash. So that's high severity burn. And this is the least likely place you're going to find morels. We will 9 times out of 10 drive past this. We might look. We have had occasions where there's been good precipitation, maybe cold weather where they like it, where they will fruit in here in abundance. It's unusual. And the problem is, though, they fruit in here. It rains on them. The rain hits the ash. It splashes the morel, and you end up with ashy morels, which isn't really fun either. So even when you find them in here, they can be a problem if they've been rained on and gotten dirty. If I were to hunt here, I would walk right through and I would walk over to these trees where there's some green on the ground and there's shade and there's these brown needles. That area is going to be shadier. It's going to hold water. And the mushrooms will be growing not in the ash, so the ground holds moisture, and the mushrooms don't get as dirty. But I'm going to drive right past this. Now here's the kind of next level. This is like a moderately severe area. It's still, though, if you look in here, it's not ideal. And you can see the grass, like that's the right height grass. We're kind of in, the right kind of elevation by looking at the grass on the side of the road. I like that. The problem with this area is these trees were too widely spaced, and they burnt pretty well, and the ground is pretty sunny. It's been pretty parched by the sun. In a wet year, there's going to be morels in here more than the last picture, but this is a slightly dry year, and we didn't find any in here. It was just too dry. So this might be okay on a scale of, say, 1 to 10. The last one I'd give a 2. This one I might give a 4, maybe a 5. I might look, but I did indeed look, and I didn't find any in this one, in this kind of slightly dry year. And this is an Oregon fire, and this is right around Memorial Day weekend. When we had this to ourselves, we didn't see another soul in here in this entire burn. We spent an entire day in this burn. And by the way, we ended up finding them here when we found a northern, because it was dry, we found a northern slope. And we found where it had been burned lightly, but we found a spring, and we were able to follow that spring quite a distance. And there were we were able to fill our bag around those wet seep areas that had natural moisture running through them, not from rain melt, but from some sort of spring action. We did pretty well, but we had to hunt around quite a while to find that spot in that particular dry forest. Now, this is a different forest, but this is ideal. I love this, the way it looks. You're going to see here, there's duff on the ground. So the ground is brown. There's coverage in the trees. There's a lot of live trees as well mixed in here. There's a fully non-burned area right over there in the distance. You can see, small green trees growing over there. And I don't know if you can see in here, probably can't. I took this picture. There were a lot of morels in this picture. I mean, there were certainly dozens of them down in this area down in here, and we went down and picked them. And this is really, when I'm driving around, what I'm looking for as my primo spot. I would give this probably a 9 out of 10. It's pretty nice. And if the weather's right, a place like this will be loaded. Similar sort of forest. This is actually a different burn as well. This is in Idaho, I think. I think it's this picture. You can see. Do you see that little red spot right there in the distance? Right there. That's Kristen. She's down there picking. She's, I think, on her hands and knees. I'm over here, and I like this scene. These little like 6, 8, 10 foot conifers that are kind of dead with no needles, or some still have needles on them, some are alive. There's often a lot of them in here, and you almost have you have to get on your hands and knees and get down into these thick little areas, and just you're picking like crazy down in here. And but you've got some big trees as well. They're standing up. You got some green trees that didn't burn over there in the distance. This is also a really nice area that held a lot of morels. Okay. I'm getting close to the end here. So that was when you're in the woods, kind of what we're looking for. And I don't want to discourage you from going to the sunnier spots, but I want to encourage you to recognize those differences and know that you might need to look in different types of terrains, and you might need to find the shadier spots. And you don't have to have dead trees necessarily. It seems to be enough that the fire will run through the trees and maybe kill some of the smaller trees, maybe stress some of the bigger trees. It doesn't have to create mayhem and kill everything to be a really high quality burn. Now, some of the things we like to take with us, walkie-talkies, I think are one of our top safety items. I cannot stress enough how useful they are. In a burn, a little breeze blowing, you can't hear each other, and you end up being those people in the woods that are yelling and screeching and whistling and making a big ruckus, and everybody else, if there is anybody else around you, they know where you are. I would encourage you to take walkie-talkies, and when you find one, you'd be like, I found some over here. You don't have to shout it out. And you can find each other. Walkie-talkies are super handy. They make really, really cheap ones. I would encourage you, try the cheap ones. When you're in one thing is people tend to buy expensive ones because they have wider range. But my experience is you're in a burn, you're rarely more than 100 yards apart, even if you can't hear each other. You don't necessarily need a lot of distance. Sometimes the cheap ones are nice. I tend to lose them. We have some nice ones now. They're called Rocky Talkies, ROCKY. Somebody got me for my birthday last year. They cost a fair bit more, but I love them because they have a carabiner clip right built into them, so you can clip them onto yourself and not lose them. Where the other walkies, I lose them. I like clip them on, and they've got the cheap little slidey clips, and I'll be walking around the forest and it's just gone. I brush into a tree, I lose them. So I do love walkie-talkies. The other one, you'll laugh, wet wipes and hand lotion are the best. Your hands, I'm going to jump forward. There they go. They look like that after an hour or two of picking. And that black, I think those are spores. I think what happened, they look like ash, but I think they're actually spores that are sticking to your fingers, and they're really sticky, and they eat at your finger pads. And if you do this for a few days, you actually will lose like your fingerprints. It's really hard on your fingers. And I love to get my hands clean with wet wipes after I hunt, and then lotion up. I know it seems like a weird detail, but when I go hunting with my friends and we get back to the truck, I am like the most popular guy because I offer people wet wipes, and they like realize, and then you wipe your face because it's got soot on it. They're the best. I don't wear gloves, and the reason is that I think they're kind of warm and uncomfortable. But I've seen people out wearing gloves when they pick, for sure. I like to bring a hanging basket for drying. We're often camping, so we do. Let me jump forward. We do this in the woods. We have these hanging baskets. That we hang from trees, and I got a tarp I can put over them if it rains. These baskets collapse, so if I need to, I can like collapse the whole basket, and I can hold 30 pounds of mushrooms in that collapsible basket when it goes down. I will warn you, don't get the big ones because they're too big, and you put the mushrooms in them, and it holds too many mushrooms. Get the ones that are 18 to 24 inches diameter at the most. These are really handy because what you can do is you can store your mushrooms in there during the day. They slowly dry out. You can get them put away quickly in the rain. And then when you finally get to your dehydrator, they dehydrate a lot quicker because they've had fresh air running through them while they're in these. And by the way, if you look in here real close, do you see those mushrooms right there? Those are spring porcinis that we found while we were out burn morel hunting, and oh my gosh, they're delicious. So we often go try to find a few of those. I always have a chainsaw with me. Well, not always, typically. I personally, I keep it in the car. I don't carry it with me. I personally use a DeWalt electric chainsaw. They're pretty cheap. I have several chainsaws, and I've been a real fan of the inexpensive DeWalt. They have a small one, and they have a medium one, and they have a big one, depending, how big a chainsaw you want to wield. They're also nice because when you're out in the woods and you want to have a fire, you're at a campground, it's so easy to have a chainsaw and go find an old piece of wood and break it down and burn it. It's quiet. You're not running a gas chainsaw. There's no gas to spill. I love the electric chainsaw. I use it all the time. And I cut a lot of wood. I have two gas chainsaws that I use a lot too. But for me, the chainsaw is a safety device. And the reason is a tree can fall across the road, and you may need to move it, or you could be spending the night on the other side of the tree because you can't get past. And we have had that happen. We have been out in the woods. We have had a tree fall in front of us. We did not have a chainsaw. We did not have warm clothing. We did not have enough water. And we were lucky enough to find some nearby campers who took pity on us and cut us out with their chainsaw, and we were able to get out of the woods. No, it was in the woods though. Yeah, that was not in a burn, she said. That was outside. I love a proper mushroom knife, and I mean one with a brush. And the reason is, these guys can be a little dirty. And it's kind of popular. Like people usually go, I don't, I use a paintbrush or have another brush, a toothbrush, whatever. And here's my answer. Get a mushroom knife with a brush on the end, because you cut it, you flip it, you brush, and you will process. When you have 3,000 morels in front of you, you want one hand trimming and brushing and one hand picking. You don't want one hand working a paintbrush and then a knife and then a paintbrush and then a knife. You will harvest significantly quicker if you have a proper mushroom knife. It really is nice. And I feel like you want to have clean mushrooms. If you have dirt on these guys, you want to try to clean as much off before you put them in your bag, because you put dirty mushrooms in a bag, dirty morels, that dirt leaves that morel, and the dirt has sex and it expands, and you have more dirt in your bag, and now you have like a ton of dirty mushrooms. And so I really would encourage you, get them clean before you put them in your bag. And I like a proper mesh bag, not because I think you're going to save the mushrooms by allowing them to spore through the mesh. I think the reason is, for me, is if you use a mesh bag, the dirt will fall through the mesh and out the bag. If you put them in a bucket, what you'll end up with is the bottom quarter of your mushrooms will not only be probably smashed, but they will be very dirty, because all the dirt will work its way down and sit in the bottom of that bucket. And even if you have holes drilled in it for air, you will still have a pretty dirty mess of mushrooms at the bottom of the bucket. So I prefer a mesh bag whenever I can. And if not, I don't have mesh, I'll still pick, but I'll be really careful that I pick clean and clean them off. I also like a shoulder strap when I go burn morel hunting. That's very important to me, because the bags can get heavy, and you can kind of tweak your arms. Carrying out 20, 25 pounds of mushrooms is a lot to carry with just your arms and your wrists and your hands. If you can get some of the weight on your shoulders, I think you can be a more efficient mushroom picker. And then I bring an extra bag, and I bring another extra bag, because invariably, if you go out with your one big bag, and you're going to find too many mushrooms to carry. In fact, might be a strategy. Take one bag, and you'll run out of space. So those are special things I like to take when I burn morel hunt. And there's your hands. Also, don't wear your nice new raincoat into the woods. You'll get black on it, and it won't wash off very easily. Your clothing gets pretty dirty. Here we are camped out. You can see these big ponderosa pines behind us. I believe this is in Idaho. And does that sound right?
Oregon.
You think that's Oregon with those big pondos? Kristen thinks it's Oregon. I think it's Idaho. It doesn't matter. Look at the morels. And there we are. We come back to camp. We dump our morels out, and then we clean them again. We go through them, brush the dirt off them again, get them ready to process. Now, if we're in a place where we don't have a dehydrator handy, usually we try to travel with a dehydrator. What's that brand we use? We use a Presto brand, and any dehydrator works. I don't know that any are better than others, but the Presto is nice. It's relatively cheap. It's very sturdy. It's a good size, and the trays stack up for traveling really nicely. We try to travel with 12 trays per dehydrator, because if you put them in the sun a little bit in these and you get them a little dehydrated, you can usually finish them off in overnight or in half a day in a dehydrator, even stack 12 high, depending how moist they are. And you can put even these big mushrooms in there whole if there's gas, and sometimes they'll expand the dehydrator, but that's okay, because as they dry, the mushrooms shrink and the whole rig will settle down and all the gaps will disappear. So it's okay. You don't have to cut your mushrooms in half if they're too big for your dehydrator, because they will shrink during the drying process. But we do tend to travel, if we can, with 2 dehydrators, 12 trays each. And when the picking's good, you need more than that. We went on a pick last year in Idaho. It was kind of fun. And we were Montana. It was Montana, with a group of people. And we had a lot of technology, including a Starlink, which, oh my gosh, we have fast Wi-Fi. out in the middle of nowhere. That was pretty awesome for us because we could work, check email, all that good stuff. But we also had a pretty good sized generator that somebody brought that could run 6 dehydrators at once, which really was disruptive in camp because it was loud. But at the same time, we had 6 dehydrators running for 3 days straight, and we must have dried 50 gallons of mushrooms. It was exceptional. Although, what's that? 50 gallons of dried after we dehydrated them. We had so many. Now, not a very sound. I mean, part of it is, running a gas generator in the woods is really not the coolest thing. Usually what we do is we stay at an RV park or a hotel like every second or third day. So we'll spend two, maybe 3 days out in the woods, and we'll go to civilization for a day or two, and we'll set up our dehydrators there and run them pretty hard for a day. And then we'll go back out in the woods. So that's usually our procedure, because it's running generators is not the norm, but last year was a special case, I guess. Let me see what I got next here. Whoops. Hey, I want to show this. The morels out west are 90% of the time bug free. Now, last year it was weird. There were a lot of bugs, and to the point where they were destructive. Normally in Western morels, bugs do not eat the morels. You get these little guys. They look like little sesame seeds. If you can see them in this picture, they live on the outside of the morel. They make kind of little webs, and I don't remember the name of them. Hoppers. They live on the outside of the morels. They crawl off. If you pick a whole bag of morels and bring them into your house, they will crawl out of the bag and go all over your house, be warned. Or if you do it in your hotel room, they will spread out. If you're in a hotel, you got to put them in your bathtub. And that these bugs can't seem to get out of the bathtub, or even better, get a hotel with a patio or a deck and run your dehydrator outside. And if you have any of these bugs, they usually fall right off because they're on the outside. You'll see them in the bottom of your dehydrator tray. They're not eating the morel. They're just living on the outside. Usually though, we try to avoid these, and they happen when the morels are several days old. So usually the way to avoid them, and when it's dry, is go up in elevation and try to find some fresher morels that haven't been around for a few days, and these bugs will disappear. For some reason last year though, in several states in the West, they had some sort of bug problem, and a lot of morels had bugs eating them, and you might pick a whole bunch and bring them home and cut them in half and throw them out. And that was pretty unusual. I've never really heard of that until last year. If I gave this presentation to you last year, I'd be like, oh, the morels out west are great. The brown morels, there's never any bugs. The morels are always nice, except for some on the outside, but last year was not so good. Yeah, no, we don't sell morels, but we're good friends to have because we give away a lot. I love this picture. This is like a blanket. This is not like a dish towel. This must be a 6-8 foot wide blanket. And if you can read the letter on it, it says seized 4th of July weekend, 2016, 245 pounds of mushrooms in Crater Lake National Park. What happened is there was a big burn that was in Crater Lake National Park, and it was also right on the outside. We actually visited the burn. We went there the first week in June, and it was a high elevation burn. It was too early. And that was right on the edge of the park. And then, yeah, we were outside. We don't break the law, especially in a national park. Look at this. What happened was all these people came in July, and they camped there, and they hunted this burn. And the rangers, I think 13 different people or parties got very large tickets. They got all their morels taken from them. And this was the combined catch of like 13 different people. And they piled them up, and they put a sign on it, and it made it in the newspaper. So let's talk about permits. You can get a permit to hunt in pretty much any forest in Western US, there are a few small exceptions. Now, here's how it works. Anybody that tells you how the permit works is wrong, unless you tell them what forest you're going to, because the way permits work in Forest Service are, every forest has a different rule, and you can't buy a permit in one forest and go use it in another forest unless they've explicitly collaborated on that permit together, which happens in a few forests. It'll be good across 2 forests. And here's the general rule. Generally, most forests will allow you to pick a limited quantity as a personal picker. It's usually measured by the gallon. It might be 2 gallons, and you have to cut them in half. Usually they will allow you to buy a commercial permit. It's usually $20. It's usually good for 7 to 10 days. You can usually pick unlimited quantities, and you never have to cut them in half. And there's a lot of usuals and normals in there. Some forests might charge a little more. Occasionally, they don't allow commercial picking. There's a few that don't allow any picking. That's very rare, very rare. But what you got to do is you got to go to their website. You got to look at the forest you're in. You got to go to the website and look at the regulations. And then when you get to this forest, you've got to go to the ranger station. There's only one forest in Western US that I know of that sells online permits. You got to go in person, and you got to pay them the money. They're almost always closed Saturday and Sunday. They usually close by 4 on Friday. They're usually open till 5, but they will often stop selling permits at 4 because they're surly. I don't know the other reason why, other than to say, when you go to buy your permit, you often have to show a driver's license. You often have to carry the permit with you. The person selling you the permit may be really helpful and give you advice, or they may not be nice at all. You never know. Every forest person is different. However, they won't give you a free map if you ask, but if you ask for a vehicle use map, they will give you wonderful maps. In a strange thing, you can buy a permit for your ATV for, at least in Oregon, it's like $10 a year, and they will direct you to the most wonderful parking areas with wonderful restroom facilities. But if you want to pick a mushroom, you got to pay $20 for a week, and they won't give you a map. I don't know why that is. But so if you do pretend like you're an ATV person and ask if they have it's called the MVUM, the motor vehicle use map, I think is what it's called. They will direct you to very detailed maps that will show roads, and they will tell you what roads are open. So don't start by asking where to go mushroom hunting, or start by asking them about access. Say, I want to go mushroom hunting up in this burn. Can you, do you have any maps that show me road access? And they usually are very open about that. So that's a little bit of advice while you're there on how to get good information at buying your permit at the station. Now, we've never been asked for a permit. However, we always get permits. And part of the reason is we don't want to make, we don't want to have the risk, but if you don't have a permit, they often want you to cut your mushrooms in half, which is just a huge hassle. Who wants to cut every mushroom in half before you put it in your bag? And they do that because morel that's cut in half has no commercial value. Now, increasingly, starting in California, more recently in Oregon, they have, and also in Colorado, they have been closing burns to all usages. And this really picked up in COVID. They will allow anybody that has a chainsaw and a timber permit, they will allow you to go in and cut the heck out of these forests, apparently. If you have a bulldozer, you probably can go pick morels there. But it's weird, they close them off to morel pickers, and it's really unfortunate. There is an increasing, I think, kind of a lobbying effort. Mushroom pickers are trying to get access, but you might want to go to the Forest Service website. Once we get a little closer into the season, I'll post that with every burn, a link to whether it's open or closed, along with whether it's currently open. But it's kind of leading a lot of commercial pickers to not pick so much in Oregon California and doing a little bit more in Washington, Idaho, and Montana, because those states have not been closing their fires like some of the other states. So you're going to want to go look and see if the forests are closed, because that's also a fat fine if you are found, trespassing in a forest that has been closed to people. Some forests also require personal permits. Some don't, and you can just pick and have a limited quantity, but others will require a personal use permit to pick. And you got to look at the forest. So you really can't go do this properly unless you know what forest you're going to, and you've found out what the rules are for that forest for personal use or commercial picking, and then you've gone and followed those rules and gotten the permit. And anybody that gives you a general guideline, oh, you don't need a permit to pick, they're wrong, because if they don't know what forest you're going to, they're basing it on their forest, which is not the same across the country. Okay. Now I think we're pretty close here. This must be kind of close to the last slide. I think this is just what I told you. Everything I mentioned was right here. So you do need permits. Remember, no wilderness, no national parks. I want to wrap up by this is the knot morel. We usually don't see these in the burns. We usually see them outside of the burns, like when we're driving to and fro or nearby. These don't tend to fruit in the burns, either gyrometras or verpas. Hopefully you know the difference between a morel and not a morel. This one is not hollow on the inside. It doesn't have a continuous stem end to cap and back end to stem. It has a distinct cap, and it has this kind of webbing on the inside. Here's another one. This is a verpa. Same thing. This is not a morel either. So make sure you know those, although I don't think we've ever kind of found them really in the burns. That said, some etiquette you want to follow. If there's other pickers in the forest, look at their lines, where they're walking, and give them some space. Don't go cut in front of them. It's just courteous to look at their line and go around them and kind of give them their space. Generally, other pickers, even commercial pickers, in my experience, are pretty friendly. If you talk to them, you can try. They'll give you the signal if they want to chit chat, or they won't chit chat. But usually, we find people to be pretty nice. And we don't believe the stories. A lot of people like to make stories about how dangerous or commercial pickers are, or blah blah blah. That's not been our experience. People have been pretty nice. Don't leave any trash. Only pick where permitted. Please respect private property. If you don't know what's private property, then you need to know. You need to pay attention to that while you're doing your map study. That if you don't know that it's public, then you probably don't have any business being there. Share your catch. There's a lot of these. Share with your friends. Give them away. Take someone new. This is a great way to introduce people to something fun. The final thing I want to say, other than, see you out there, with this picture here, we're riding into a burn in Oregon on our bikes, which are kind of fun to ride e-bikes into burns. We found this nest of eggs in a tree, and it's just beautiful. The final thing is, I like to close with is, these burns are kind of special. And I think initially you may have the reaction like, oh my gosh, this is death and destruction. This is awful. But as you spend more time in them, and especially when you go to second and third year burns and see the regrowth, there's something kind of beautiful and natural about them. And they are not all tragedy. And you don't want to root for burns. Obviously, they're very damaging, but there's also something serene. They're quiet. There's not a lot of wildlife in them right in that very first season. They're really kind of beautiful and worthy of being enjoyed. So I would encourage you to give them a go. I would encourage you, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to be helpful. I think that is it.
Wow, thank you, Trent and Kristen. That was amazing. And we were talking about recipes in the chat there a little bit. I'm guessing you've had the recipe Gina Bone really likes with chicken thighs and sherry and cream sauce with the dried morels on it.
Oh, you remind me that morel with chicken.
Yeah,
Morels with chicken.
we have that in our cookbook, don't we?
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah,
Oh, we
Yeah.
can't hear you.
yeah, we have that in our. I think we have that.
Not Gina's.
It's not Gina's. It's a similar one. It's chicken thighs and sherry and mhm.
That's my favorite.
There's no butter in it either, is there?
No, it's
No, just but there is cream. Figure out how to make a vegetarian version of it with chicken of the woods or something.
Yeah.
Ham. So,
Okay. Well, unless there's any, we're wrapped here. Unless anybody's got some questions.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
yeah, does anybody have any?
That was absolutely wonderful, Trent.
Thank you.
Mike was wondering, like, if he heads out there, how could he find a hiking morel hunting partner?
It's a good question.
There are some outlets in California that take people out.
Yeah.
It's like Relish Culinary, usually can take us.
Yeah, Relish Culinary out in California takes people out. There are a few guided people, especially in California, doing it. But I feel like Facebook is where we have made most of our new friends, either in the mycological societies. You know, and you guys are all connected to mycological societies. I would just say start asking. I'm looking to come out. I'd love to have somebody to hunt with. I think what you're not going to get answers from is when you go and you say, where do I go? Tell me what to do. I think if you kind of approach it more generally, I'm looking for a hunting partner. We do see a lot of that happening in Facebook, and there will be people that will want to partner up with you. We love partnering up with people. Our kind of thing is we tend to be like, we're not making plans. Like, here's what we think we're doing, but we're not going to commit to be at one place at one time because we like to like follow the reins.
But they could reach out to like.
Yeah. She's saying you could reach out to
The Boise.
yeah, like Idaho, Montana, Oregon. There's a lot of mycological societies, and I think people are pretty friendly if you kind of approach it the right way.
All right, that's a thumbs up from Mike.
Okay. And Mike, if you're still stuck, reach out to us. I can try to make some introductions. If we know where and when you're going, we might be able to hook you up with somebody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So this will go up on YouTube a little later?
Yeah, we have a club member that edits them for us, so it takes her a little while. She's just doing it on a volunteer basis, but
Nice.
we'll put it up on YouTube. We'll let you
It'll take
know.
2 to 3 weeks and then it'll be up and we'll let you know.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for having us today. And maybe we'll see some of you guys in North Carolina in August. Bye, Eleanor.
Mama, thank you. And thank you, Eleanor, for coming on too. That's great. Eleanor probably
Missed it for the world.
yeah, Eleanor probably has more morel hunting experience than anyone else I know. She got to hunt them when the elm trees were dying from Dutch elm disease, and you said you would find them by the thousands under those trees. It's just amazing.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah,
And when the apples were dying around, it was hundreds of thousands.
just amazing.
Just unbelievable. And the morchella that we get here, which is what we now call Americana, but used to call esculenta, this is the size, like a foot, even more than that.
Wow.
So, and in the East, we have a tendency of counting each one as one. So this one would be a one, and that one would be a one. But of course, in terms of amounts, it's just unbelievable. But the elms have died, and the apple orchards have been cut down, and we don't find as many as we used to, nowhere near. Still, the New Jersey area is very good. Still, some areas in Connecticut, along the Hudson, where there's a lot of lime. So we go very differently. We go by lime, the existence of lime, what kind of pH we get. Definitely temperature of the soil. We sort of look at lilacs and all sorts of stuff like that. However, climate change has changed all of that. So now, yeah, the dandelions is still a good sign. If you have 70% white heads on dandelion patch, it's a good sign. And lilacs are now blooming after the morels. So this is all changing. So all these good signs we used to have are not as reliable. It seems to me like maybe burn morels are more reliable because it takes a burn, you know, and then next year they'll show up. It's all very interesting. One of the theories, by the way, Trent, about why is it that they decide to pop after the not the severe fires, but the not so severe fires, is that the roots are still alive. The trees may be dead, but the roots are still alive. And the mushrooms, it's kind of a scare of death. This is the time to sporulate as fast as possible, because maybe you won't have a tomorrow over there. But in many areas, and you probably know it from your experience, they'll go back down and the forest will regenerate. And if there's another fire, you'll get the same identical thing again.
Yes.
All of a sudden it'll be covered with morels.
Yeah.
So it's like you said, we still have no idea what exactly is going on there.
Yeah, and that reminds me, one of the beauties of the burn morels are you don't have to have a secret patch. Like it can be like we do with the maps. You can share it with the community. It's there for a year or two. They're in burns. It's no secret. Like you're not doing anybody a disservice by sharing. Whereas, you know, your local morel patch, I mean, you don't want to tell, Sam's not going to tell everybody where he got that nice pile of mushrooms 2 days ago. He'd be crazy to do that.
You know, the patch that the New York Mycological Society used to do its annual hunt, that actually was willed to it. It was in a will.
Oh,
To
was
the
it
New York
private land?
Mycological Society by the Deutsches, if I'm not mistaken.
That's funny.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I like that open quality about the burns. I feel like it creates a different type of environment. Like I would never want to do morel maps for natural morels because people would like shoot you.
Yep, they'll kill you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Well, thank you again, everybody. Happy morel hunting. And we'll see you soon. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Cornelia, stop the recording before you log out
All right.
or close the meeting.
And then we shaved truffles on top of that. And it was like heaven.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it was neat.
Did you notice any difference in flavor between the white ones and the black ones?
Very different. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, they were very different. And we kind of infused them with different things. Like we did the black with truffles. I mean, we did the black with chocolate. I think Kristen liked the white and I like the black.
The black a lot too, surprisingly, in the pasta.
Yeah, the black we did in the pasta was pretty good. Maybe we don't have a favorite, but they were very distinct. They smelled different and tasted a little different.
White are more like the traditional, and the black are kind of like the pineapple.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Oh, she's talking to me now, not to you guys, about how the truffles tasted, even though I was there.
Different people have different taste buds, you know.
So has anybody tried pecan truffle?
Oh, somebody said something about pecan truffles. Who said that?
That was me.
That was Neil. Okay.
Neil, play the game.
We can hear you now.
All right.
So are you saying you've tasted them or are you just talking about them?
No, I was just wondering if anyone had tried them. I've never tried them.
They're
So-
pretty good.
Yeah, Sam and I tried one that had been frozen, but it still tasted amazing because it was picked when it was ripe. So
Well, we actually had as our speaker, 5-6 years ago,
Tim Brenneman.
Tim Brenneman, who works at the research garden farm down in Tifton, Georgia for the state. And one of his things was trying to find more value-added products for farmers in Georgia to have. And so he was talking to pecan growers who've got orchards they've had for a long time saying, you need to start looking for truffles because it's a whole nother product that you can add. And so he's been working with a guy with a dog, and it's been fun.
I wonder if they're as far south as Mobile, Alabama, because that's where I live.
Ah, I do not know.
They grow all over the country, and they also grow with oak, the pecan truffles, not just with pecans, and you can find them wild, growing wild. Somebody from Oregon came with a dog to one of the Boston walks in one of our woods. And sure enough, that's where they were. They found them there. It's fascinating. And now you have a friend of mine who is cultivating the tuber borchii, the white Italian truffle, in North Carolina. Am I right, or is it South Carolina, Sam?
It's North Carolina.
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Dr. O.
Well, that'd be awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, well, he has huge success with them. It's amazing, and he's, I think, growing them with pines, which of course the Italians are all turning in their grave when they hear that. But they're growing there with pines, and some of the pictures, the photos of like carpets of them, sort of beginning to pop up, almost look like it can be, you know.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start with a little kind of club businessy kind of stuff, and then Trent will be doing his talk. But we wanted to share a few things. One of the things is in our notice, one of the things Cornelia talked about was that a book by a friend of ours who was a former speaker, The Mushroom Hunters by Langdon Cook, is now out in paperback. But this is what the hardback looks like. And it's a really great book. And we had fun when he came because we arranged for him to do, besides talking to our club, we arranged for an event with Georgia Organics, which is, you know, a statewide organization, that they did a special meal at one of their donors' houses and, you know, sold tickets to it. And Langdon talked, and then they had about 8 local chefs making foraged stuff. And we took Langdon out and we found a couple hundred morels that one day, which was really great. So speaking of finding morels, wanted to show you what Cornelia and I did yesterday morning. So
This
This
looks
is-
nice.
this was,
Wow.
That's
This
not.
looks nice.
and
Or past prime.
yeah, some of these are like, you know, we're going to save them to throw in our yard, or some of these were, I was surprised.
I tested one spot last weekend and there was nothing.
Yep, this is a reliable spot we go to every year that's about an hour and a half south of here.
Oh, south. Okay.
Yeah, so I think we're still waiting up here a little bit. Unfortunately, it's going to be raining, but here are a couple of those from
Right.
that picture.
That's
And,
nice. That's a nice size.
yep, those were a lot of fun.
Try barbecuing them. I put them on the grill just because I grill everything. And they were
Of
the
course,
best way I've ever eaten them. They
What-
flatten out and they just cook. They just are great on the grill.
Did you put barbecue sauce on them?
Yeah, I have my own sauce. And yeah,
Well, you have to divulge.
well, it's no tomatoes. It's a mustard soy sugar based sauce.
Sounds good.
well, put the recipe in the chat, Richard.
Yeah, I might want to market it one day.
Well, leave out the one secret ingredient.
I told you the 3 main ingredients. Just
So a couple other things. Well, hi, we've got some new members on here. I'm Sam Landis. I'm the treasurer and membership coordinator for the Mushroom Club of Georgia.
And I'm Cornelia Cho. I'm the president of the Mushroom Club of Georgia. I believe Jeanette Hansen is on here too, if you want to show your video and say hi to people. So they know.
Oops, wait.
And Jeanette is
Hi,
the
how are you?
secretary.
Well,
Excellent.
you know what I'm gonna have to start doing? Checking my front yard where the ginkgos.
Oh,
I got
that's right.
morels on under my ginkgo tree last year.
That's
So,
right. That was pretty amazing.
I know, I'm still amazed. So I'll see. Hopefully they'll be back.
Okay. And let's see. One of the things that Cornelia and I do together is we teach, thanks to Karen Hurtubise. Karen, wave. Thanks to Karen, she runs the Nature Studies program at John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina. And Cornelia and I have, for the last year and a half, 2 years, taught a twice a year, a week-long mushroom immersion class. And the next one we're teaching is the end of June, beginning of July. And that one filled up months ago, but the new catalog is online and we're teaching for a week in October, and there's still spots in that class as far as I know. So just wanted to let people know. And Cornelia, before I do a quick treasurer's report, is there anything else you want to talk about?
So I know I put these in the newsletter, but then some people that are in the meeting don't read the newsletter. So there's a couple of presentations that I'll be doing that are in Wisconsin. One of them I'm really excited about, which is actually the Wild Harvest Festival that Sam Thayer and Melissa Price put on. But before that, actually, Melissa organized a conference called Food as Medicine, and that'll be happening April 28th. And I have links to that in our newsletter, but just wanted people to know about that. They're interested in. So, and I also I just want to mention, because I didn't put it in the newsletter, but I'm still working on Logs to Food, the project of, gathering up all the wood that's chopped down in Atlanta and the wood that's viable for growing shiitakes and other mushrooms. And Sam and I got to visit when we went to the Jadam Natural Ultra Low Cost Farming Conference in Beltsville. We also got to visit a mushroom cultivator that's doing some really amazing things with outdoor cultivation and just incredibly successful. Joe at Field and Forest says he sells him more spawn than almost anybody else. So he's growing a lot of mushrooms and selling all of them. So.
And hopefully he's going to be our speaker sometime in the next few months.
Right.
And for those of you who really liked last month's speaker, or you missed last month's speaker, Linda Black Elk, her YouTube video is now posted on the Mushroom Club of Georgia YouTube channel. So you can catch that talk. And thanks to our member, Lauren Cooper, who edited it for us.
Right. And I know Darling's not on here, but one of our members offered to help me with putting Logs to Food on our website too. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate our members tremendously. And actually I had a request, let's see, 2 requests. One of our members has been growing oyster mushrooms on chopped up invasive plant material that's been taken out of parks. So he's successfully grown oyster mushrooms on English ivy and wisteria and privet. And he is wondering about a source of 5-gallon or other size plastic buckets, food safe plastic buckets. So if anyone knows of some good, I know I've gotten them from Brewster's before, from the ice cream store, but I just thought I'd ask our community if anyone knows of that. And I also wanted to know if there's anyone that's living in Sandy Springs. Lost Corner has a community garden and they've got 20 plots. And you have to be a resident of Sandy Springs to get it. So write to me in the chat if you're a resident of Sandy Springs.
Oh, and speaking of Sandy Springs, hopefully the newsletter we sent out on February 11th included the link to the commercial that 8 of our Mushroom Club members were in that was shot at Lost Corner Park in Sandy Springs. And hopefully you get a chance to watch that because it's quite fun.
All right, and I see Trent asked me to put the link to our class of John C. Campbell in the chat, which I'll do after we finish this first part. So
Okay, well, and so I'm going to do a quick treasurer's report.
okay, hit it, dear.
So hi all, it's all going to be verbal, but the club is doing really well in our, and one of the reasons they're doing very well is after we became a 501c3 a couple years ago, one of our members who helps run a family foundation, the foundation gave the club $15,000.
Right.
So, and most of our income comes from memberships. We do get some from the workshops we give and the auction at the potluck, but our bank account, we have $44,484, and our PayPal account, we now have 2,500 in. So we are doing very well. We're working on looking at ways to use that to benefit our members. One of the things we're looking at is creating a scholarship, 1 or 2 scholarships for the NAMA event that's happening in August this year in North Carolina. And we will be sending out some notices about that soon because registration is supposed to open pretty soon. And for anyone who's interested in going to that, go to namyco.org and look. We've had links in our newsletter, but look at the kind of description of the foray, the national foray, and I can assure you that this one is going to sell out probably pretty fast. And one of the things we have done for our clubs before, in our club specifically, is the minute it opens, we send a blast email to our entire club and say, okay, NAMA registration's open, register now. But you do need to become a member of NAMA to be able to attend. You do get a little discount because you are a member of an affiliate club. So take that into heart, but it will be August 24th through 27th in Hendersonville, North Carolina at the Cayuga Conference Center. And it's just gorgeous up there. And we're going to find a lot of mushrooms and we're going to have a great time. And we will have probably between 300 and 350 people there from all over the country. And we're trying to see if we can get the Italians to come back this year. They haven't been in a few years. Okay.
Yes. So last time that we did this in North Carolina, it sold out in 3 days online. So, all right.
All right. So time to introduce Trent and Kristen.